Okay,
There's
perfect.
always just a little bit of technical difficulty sometimes. Always.
It's okay. I'm just happy to be here with you. So, for everyone following the live, this is my friend Erin Noon K. She is hosting a live today. We did experience technical difficulties, so I had to switch over as host. And the discussion today will be Black disabled history.
Yes. Perfect.
Sorry.
I can't see you on my end, and I
Mhm.
don't know why. So, sick girl problems or people in the comments, let us know if you can see both of us. Because for some reason, I cannot see my beautiful friend Ola.
Thank you.
And I just saw her a minute ago. Um,
Maybe.
so you can
Oh,
see both of us. Okay, that's really strange. But oh well. Okay, so this is how it's going to work today.
oh,
So
wonderful. So one of my colleagues, John Gilroy, he's a public speaker. He actually says he can see both of us. John, is my head cut off or?
because
Sorry,
it's so
because it's kind of
strange
it's a
because
weird.
I just see a black screen. So I don't know if there's something wrong. Like I can see
Oh, okay,
myself at the bottom,
this is
but
better.
I
Okay.
can't see you. So that's so strange.
Yeah, this is better. I think but they can see both of us now. I can see you. Sorry you can't see me.
That's okay. I'm not used to much better. Okay, great. I'm not used to it being black up here, so um, on the screen at least, for me. So I don't know if that's a glitch on my Instagram or uh, whatever it is, but I'm just so happy that you're willing to sit down with me today. I know that you've been on my podcast before, the Claiming Disability podcast, and I loved our conversation so much. And I think that was 2020. You were talking about the erasure of Black disabled history and the Black Panther Party and their involvement with the 504 sit-ins and all of this education that honestly I learned from you. I mean, yes, there's resources like Crip Camp and things, but I learned so much history from you that day. And I've just been watching you, and you're amazing. Like, you do all these amazing things. You're a public speaker, you're always talking about this stuff. Um, and I just super excited to sit down with you today because I feel like disability history is still that final frontier that we don't really touch on. So for folks who maybe aren't familiar with your work, why don't you do a little introduction for us really quick?
Well, first, thank you so much for your kind words. I've learned so much from you, and I think everything that you do as an entrepreneur, as a disabled entrepreneur, has had an impact on a lot of people, more people than you actually know. So just thank you for having me because you've taught me so much. But to
Oh, you
familiar,
taught me so much.
it's a kindred sisterhood. But I just to be brief, I'm a public speaker, I'm a writer, and I work in the nonprofit sector. When I was in college, I started a small education nonprofit called Project Ascend, and we provide college scholarships to disabled youth. And in my writing, I've been published by CNN, the Huffington Post, and NBC News. And one of the articles that I wrote for NBC News was about Black disabled history and showing how common it is for many of the Black history makers that we all know that we know who they are, but we don't know that they have hidden disabilities. In the article, I wrote about Halle Berry wearing hearing aids because of domestic violence and how one of her partners, seriously damaged her eardrum with one blow to the face. I talked about George Washington Carver and his multiple disabilities as a result of catching like common communicable diseases back then. I believe it might have been measles or whooping cough. And I even talked about Harry Belafonte having dyslexia. And so for me, it was more so, I grew up so ashamed of who I was. I had a hidden disability. I had, when I was a kid, I had a heart transplant and a kidney transplant, and I didn't want anybody to know. And I was so ashamed of who I was. And I was trying to find, the only thing I remember about disability history was one paragraph in my US history book about the ADA. And I wanted to come out of the closet and not be ashamed of who I was anymore. And so that's what kind of inspired the Black Disabled History campaign.
Exactly. I think, and I don't want to say that all disabled people have this experience, but I mean, I experienced something similar in regards to, I took a civil rights class in high school, and they didn't even talk about the disability rights movement. And the disability rights movement is happening in conjunction with all of these other movements. And like you said, there's so much shame around disability. I still feel like when I see, people that you talked about in your amazing Black Disabled History series, Sold in Her Truth. I didn't know she was disabled. I didn't know Harriet Tubman was disabled. I didn't know, all this stuff because it's not taught in our history books. It's not.
Mhm. That's facts. But also, as a woman with a disability, I can relate to you because so much of the women's history movement excludes us too. And there were so many disabled women involved in it, who were just like a lot of us, who were hiding their disabilities for fear that it would bring shame to the movement or it would discredit them. So it's never been just about Black history to me, because I've also done a women's history campaign too, and how feminism can be very ableist and be very exclusive. And I'm tired of being excluded. I want a voice. We both deserve a voice. All of us deserve a voice, and we need our history recognized. So if I knew all these people were disabled behind closed doors, I wouldn't have grown up feeling so alone, isolated, and I'd have role models. I had role models growing up, but I always remembered, well, they don't deal with what I deal with. They don't have to take medication every day like I do. They don't have trouble walking like I do. They don't have to take a wheelchair to family vacations and amusement parks or at the airport. One of the things that I hated as a kid was I would have to travel outside of, I live in the DC area, but I have to travel outside to get medical care. I have to go to Pennsylvania to get my transplants and then come back every couple of weeks, every couple of months to get treatment. And I would always get judged by the airline because I needed a wheelchair, and they were just looking at me like, you're a teenager, you're not even you're a preteen. What do you need a wheelchair for? Your legs feel tired today? All these interrogative questions that I have to reveal my deepest, darkest medical trauma just to get what I need. And maybe if we had a diversity of images of what disability looked like, and it was commonly studied, people wouldn't be so judgmental. I wouldn't have to constantly out myself. There could be an understanding that people with disabilities look various sorts of ways, and they have the capability of making history too.
Exactly. And you're getting so many likes and the comments and like exactly. I mean, one, and I'm sure you know this, but DC is so flipping inaccessible. It's the most inaccessible city I've ever been to.
Really?
Like, and I mean, guys, the place where the Capitol crawl took place
Um,
which Ola could tell me all about, is still fucking inaccessible. So I'm like, some of it feels very uh a lot of disability history feels like pomp and circumstance, because I know when I talk about things like the 504 sit-ins and the Capitol crawl of 1990, a lot of disabled people in my comments are like, we need to protest now. We need to be doing things now. And I'm like, guys, we are. The struggles that are happening today are things that Ola has been fighting for the longest time, for the Affordable Care Act, for that not to be stripped away. That's something we've been fighting the government for, and we literally had protests for. We're fighting for people to wear masks as disabled people because that's an issue. I mean, it's happening. We're doing it. It's just not, I don't know, like, we have to understand that the things that are happening today, I don't know, there's so much debate about if it's even a disability rights issue. The whole thing is just so confusing, honestly. Like, sometimes I get really tired of our community, to be perfectly, I mean, and I say it all the time. I really do.
I understand activism and advocacy can be exhausting, and there's so many differing opinions, and you know, there's no one solution. And times have changed. There's not only one form of protest. We live in a social media age. Like, I'm at that age right now. I'm exhausted. Even I'm always tired. I was like, I thought this could never be, but I'm like, I don't know if I can go down to the Capitol, make a speech right now. But I know I can upload a video on TikTok and talk about what I need, talk about what the community needs. So things are changing, and it's influencers like you that are leading the change.
You're leading the change. Ola, I've been wanting to tell you this for a while, and I know you and I talk back and forth, and we're both so busy. But when you came out and you were like, listen, because a couple of years ago, Lizzo had ableist slang in her music. And the white disabled community pitched a fucking fit, frankly. And then Beyonce came out with ableist lyrics, and then she apologized to the community. But I loved your stance about it, because we're so entrenched in ableism, and Black women don't get the same leniency as white women do. Like, let's be real. Like, and just for this like attack to be happening around ableist language, and for me, I hate that there's no conversation, because I made a video defending Lizzo, and essentially the community just snapped back at me, and they were like, how dare you, like, and I'm like, I don't think we should be tearing powerful Black women down. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think we should, for making a mistake that everybody makes, because we live in an ableist world.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just, the whole thing was so ridiculous. And I felt like you were the only advocate that was really like, hey, Beyonce is amazing, and you're not going to tear this woman down for just one mistake.
Well, thank you for having a video about that. I need to check it out. I'm in the midst of all that drama. I wasn't paying attention to anything, but I think it takes courage to speak out against white supremacy, and not enough white disabled people are doing it because they fear backlash, and it's annoying. I mean, my thing is we can't tackle ableism in the larger political structure if we can't tackle racism within the disabled community and how their voices are prioritized. I mean, you don't real I mean, it's very ableism and white privilege is very complex, and it is very hard for white disabled people to accept that a disability does not mean you don't experience privilege. in your life. There are wealthy white disabled people. The most of the people that I know who are disabled and working do not always come from low income backgrounds. They tend to come from upper middle class or middle class backgrounds. You've had the privilege of going to school. You've had the privilege of having support that other people, other marginalized people in the disabled community don't. We may all be marginalized, but it's not in the same context. And with Beyonce and Lizzo, that was complicated for me because people want you to choose a tug of war. It's either your blackness or your disability, or it's either your womanhood or your blackness. It's always a tug of war between allegiance to whichever community. And my allegiance is to Black disabled women. It's always going to be that. And I know the difference between a productive call out and a chance to attack a famous celebrity so you can get on the news and you can have a platform and you can be credited as a white savior, a white disabled savior at that, condemning one of the most powerful women in music. And Lizzo, who is already, to be honest, I believe she's a victim of ableism, even though she's not disabled, because people are constantly assigning disability to her based off of her weight. She's vegan, she works out, she has the stamina a lot of other musicians don't. Meaning Beyonce can sing and dance and her mic is on. Lizzo can sing and dance and her mic is on. And they're still hitting amazing notes. This is something Taylor Swift cannot do. She can neither dance nor hit amazing notes.
I
And
love you so much. I wish I could see your face.
I'll share the live with you, the video, the recording, but
Oh,
these
I'm gonna be posting video clips, guys. This interview is gonna be too good for me to not post clips.
I mean, and well, I support you. I'm gonna post clips too, but it's that you're gonna assign Lizzo to a life of death, use slurs like obese and overweight, and not knowing that the factors of BMI that create like the label obesity and overweight were created by eugenics, a European like BMI was created by an astronomer named Adolphe Quetelet, I believe. You have to quote me on the name. I'll get the name later, but he was a eugenist and believed Black people were less than, were inferior. And so we are using this BMI to determine who's fat, who's not, who's obese, who needs to lose weight. And we're assigning disabilities to Lizzo and saying that she's going to die this horrible death of a heart attack because of her weight, not knowing a damn thing about her. So she is on the receiving end of ableism, and no one wants to talk about that. You don't have to be disabled to be on the receiving end of ableism when people are assigning disabilities to you based on your appearance alone. So why don't you talk about that instead of just going, she's an ableist, she said spaz. No, it's deeper than that.
Right. And I I mean, you and I have talked a lot and the politics of disability, right? And like, I mean, you're not afraid to say the stuff that I wish more people in the disabled community would say. Like, guys, you need to follow Ola right now on her Instagram, on her TikTok, on her Twitter. I mean, like the things you say, I'm like, whoa, I never even thought about that. Exactly. And
Oh,
I know, like, she's just saying so many things that are just like, oh my God, like, I didn't, I'm, I'm ignorant, guys. I didn't know. You know what I mean? And
I wouldn't say it's ignorance. We all, there's a massive amount of things that I don't know. And I have a massive amount of privilege too. So
And I think white disabled people, they especially get upset when I say white disabled people have privilege. And it's not to say that you don't have a struggle, but we do have privilege because of the color of our skin. And we're just not ready to have that conversation in the community. What happened with Selma Blair a few weeks ago? Like, there's crickets in the disabled community about white disabled advocates of influence. You know, when they say racist, you know, things. Like, we need to, I feel like as a community, we need to hold ourselves more accountable. And there's just, I don't feel like there's any accountability sometimes. It's always just like, you know, it's frustrating, you know?
Very much so.
I, exactly. And medical racism, and it can just go on and on and on. And so when you were doing your Black Disabled History series, and you have some amazing merch that I love, like, um, you know, when you were going through, were there any things that like, wow, I didn't know this, I didn't know this about Samuel L. Jackson, I didn't know this about Serena and Venus? Like, were there any, because for me, when I was doing my Teach Disability History series, it was JFK, right? Because JFK is so publicly known, but yet we don't know that he was disabled as hell. You know, like, I didn't know. You know, I had never seen pictures of JFK using crutches because of his RA and because of his back issues and everything. Like, there were there were some that just blew my mind. I was like, I had no, and Marilyn Monroe, exactly.
Mhm.
Samuel L. Jackson had a stutter, Marilyn Monroe had a stutter, and she had endometriosis and a whole litany of other things. I find, like, when I talk about disability history, particularly with people like Marilyn Monroe, JFK, there's always a lot of debate about disability and how it's framed. Like, are you sure? And I'm like, I'm sure. This is from PBS. I'm sure. Like, do you feel like you get that?
Yeah, or that's not a disability. And I'm like, as someone who had a disability, a hidden disability, and I still do in some contexts when I'm not using my chair, the invalidation of if you're not in a user, if you're not a wheelchair user, if you don't use crutches, if you don't use a cane, if you don't have a service dog, that you're not really disabled. And that's the resistance I've gotten from the campaigns, is that these people aren't really disabled. But also, I've had some surprise moments, learning facts that I didn't know. Like Samuel L. Jackson, I've had to cut. I talk a lot, so forgive me.
No,
I had to
you're supposed to. This is supposed to feel free.
um so I had to cut a lot of Samuel L. Jackson's story down. But people feeling like the civil rights movement was so long ago and that no one's alive, when Samuel L. Jackson was an usher at Dr. King's funeral. Um, like, for example, I didn't include this, but Samuel L. Jackson has a felony on his record because as a student at Morehouse College, he and a bunch of other activists held the Morehouse College Board of Trustees hostage to get changes made at the college. And one of those people he held hostage was Dr. Martin Luther King Sr., so MLK's father. And so Samuel L. Jackson was a part of the civil rights movement, and his mom moved him from Atlanta to LA because she got a call from the FBI stating that her son would be dead within a year if he kept participating in certain types of Black activism at the time. The Black Power movement, which was heavily associated. Black Power movement was amazing, and it's been misportrayed. I mean, I feel like the Black Power movement, Black Panthers, they were the foundation of free healthcare. in this country because they, the Black Panthers had free healthcare clinics, sickle cell testing, all that stuff. But they're so associated with, guns and, your Second Amendment, your right to bear arms. And so I didn't know that the FBI knew who Samuel L. Jackson was before the rest of us did. I mean, and those stories are remarkable, and he's disabled, he has a stutter, are that, exploring the disability story of Lorraine Hansberry. I love Lorraine Hansberry. She's the playwright behind A Raisin in the Sun, and the sexism that goes along with disability. Because I was watching a documentary on PBS about her, and she went to the grave not knowing that she had cancer, because back then they only told the husbands and not the women patients. And that was her ex-husband. Like, I mean, they weren't even together anymore. And having to do like a critical analysis of how domestic violence influences disability and how disabled women are targets for domestic violence. Discovering that Tina Turner had third-degree burns on her face from Ike Turner's abuse, or that she had to have surgery on her face from all the damage he did from the blows to the face. When she would sing, her nose was so damaged that blood would be leaking through her throat when she sang. So these are actual factual disabilities, and they aren't cured by a surgery. She spent years having night terrors and nightmares, attempted suicide as well from all the trauma that she faced throughout the years. So explaining to people, hey, you can become disabled from domestic violence. And then disabled women are also targets of domestic violence. And then talking about cancer, because I dealt with cancer myself, and the culture of secrecy in Hollywood behind cancer, because you don't want to lose your opportunity to work and audition. Discovering that actors need specific insurance, I think it's liability insurance if they do their own stunts. So Chadwick Boseman, passing suddenly from colon cancer, would he have been able to get the role of Black Panther had he disclosed that he had cancer? Like, it, it kills me, because even when you'll see this later in the campaign is almost over, but we'll be tackling HIV too, and how studies showed that in the 80s, when there were less treatment options, and HIV/AIDS patients, when they kept it to themselves that they had the disease, they had a less likelihood to survive. But for people who revealed to family and friends that they had the disease, their survival rates were longer, larger. That keeping illness to yourself and that disability shame, it can end up costing you your life. And coming out of the closet can lengthen it. The support that you need is there. But we live in an economy where your disability determines how people value you, if they'll employ you, and it's wrong.
It's diagnoses, just like Ola is saying, like, saves lives. Like, there's a reason amazing advocates are out here like Ola trying to get people to embrace their disability and disability pride, because your ability to embrace yourself can literally save your life. And it's just, I mean, and just the people that you brought up with Hollywood, I mean, there's so many people who are, we're finding out these people have disabilities. Celine Dion, Phil Collins, like, Bruce Willis, like Wendy Williams, who is literally in a conservatorship, a disabled conservatorship. Like, everything is related to disability rights. And I think all disabled advocates are just banging their head against the wall because disability is a human experience. And as soon as we pull away, the curtain of, like you talk about with the erasure, just treating it like it wasn't real. Like, I think it's important to talk about Black disabled history, to talk about disabled history in general, so that we know and we feel more connected to our community. It's a tough thing. And I just loved your series so much. Oh my God, that's my door. Sorry about that. Got a package. But there's so many, there's just so many. I'm sorry, that threw me off track, but I've just learned so much.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I will leave on I will just leave this, food for thought for disabled people who feel like the Black Disabled History Campaign doesn't apply to them. These people are still disabled too. They're still just like you. And also, I wanted to highlight how racism influences public policy for disabled people. I mean, look at disability benefits and look at the welfare queen stereotype. I don't feel like disabled people would be, in this poverty trap if we didn't have presidents like Ronald Reagan who believed Black women were scamming, social services and getting welfare checks. The belief that African Americans, Black Americans are lazy and just getting a check for not doing anything, or food stamps, when there are work requirements in a lot of states for you to even get that. You will continue, the disability rights movement of today will continue to suffer if you don't recognize the intersectionality of race and disability, and how racism influences how American public policy will punish you for being disabled under the belief that you're not really disabled, you're probably a Black person, and you don't deserve anything, and believing that welfare is a form of reparations. So we can, as a community, we can continue to self-sabotage and continue to put powerful white able-bodied faces, white disabled male faces as the front of the movement. But that
Serious? Oh my God. Keep going. Keep going.
I mean, the reason I'm blunt about this stuff is because I've survived a heart transplant, kidney transplant, and cancer. I don't have anything left to lose. I'm on my 9th life right now. What do we like? That's kind of what the Ola's truth handle means for me. It's like I have to tell the truth, and having these in-depth conversations about disability rights and disability justice rooted in niceties and politeness has gotten us nowhere. It's time to have the tough conversations that, unless you change this movement fundamentally, disabled people will continue dying. Look at Donald Trump right now. Not regardless of the candidacy for presidency, outside of that, but this culture of wanting to roll back the protections for people with pre-existing conditions through the ACA, which I advocated against. All of that stems from, we don't want Black people to get health care. This was created by a Black president as a free gift to Black people and as a free gift to people who don't deserve it. So when are you going to get it that whiteness and disability is not going to save you?
Yes.
Like
Say
Mitch
it
McConnell,
louder for the people in the back.
I'd love for people to read Mitch McConnell, or even look on YouTube at Mitch McConnell's um Mitch McConnell's campaign ads in the 90s and the 80s, where he embraced affordable healthcare. And many conservatives did back then. But once it's embraced by another sect of people, then, it's something that they're against. Like, what? And I don't know how to put it into words, but encapsulate it. But address the misogyny in the disability rights movement instead of always giving men power, and allow the next generation to lead instead of holding on to positions of power to the day that you die? What is keeping you from passing the torch and passing the baton? I mean, I've had the privilege of being able to mentor a few people. I would love to be a better mentor, but I just don't have the capacity. Sometimes I'm dealing with illness, I'm dealing with multiple jobs, but I try to make it so other people have opportunities, because it's not just passing the mic, it's passing the power. Speaking opportunity, they want me to talk about Social Security. Nope, not doing it. Passing it off to someone else because I'm not on benefits. This is not my arena. You do not always have to occupy space just because you're given the opportunity. Pass the torch, pass the mic, and pass the power.
Pass the power. That's so powerful.
Thank you.
And I think one of the hardest things is like there's such a disconnect, right, in the disabled community that, I mean, I feel like we all know that racism exists and it's a huge issue in our community. And Black disabled activists are addressing it, and it just falls to the wayside. You know, and even how we structure these apps, like TikTok, suppressing Black disabled creators, suppressing marginalized groups.
Mm-hmm.
I think we could all do better with that mentality of just passing the mic, amplifying Black voices, and really amplifying it. I mean, sometimes I'll like see something and it'll just be like a panel of all white disabled people. And I'm like, who is this for? Who's it for? I mean, us, I'm assuming, but like, it's just, there's no diversity in the experience. And I get bothered a lot of the time because in the disabled space, particularly, I grew up in systems. I grew up, with all the benefits and things. There's a lot of disabled people who haven't experienced that. And I'm not saying their experience isn't valid. Everybody's experience is valid. But I mean, like, we need people who are familiar with Medicaid and SSI. And like, if you're not familiar with those systems, that's fine. But pass the mic to somebody who is. Unfortunately, and even myself, I'm a very privileged disabled person to be able to have a business and be out here and advocating in the capacity that I do. I mean, that's a privilege that not everybody has, but we could always be doing so much better. I mean, I don't mean to be like saying the wrong thing, but I probably do. But
No,
like, and you're probably like rolling your eyes, just
no.
going, "Oh my, she doesn't know what she's talking about." But like, what can we do to make it better? I mean, I know that's like such a blanketed, and it's the same question that people ask us, right, when we're on panels, like, how do we listen to the disabled community? Like, and disabled people all over the world are like screaming at the top of their lungs about the exact same thing, like, what do we do to help, Black disabled activists in our own community?
I would say demand better. I would say if you are on a board, demand that not just Black, but people of color, be interviewed. I'm sorry, people of color, people of different genders, people of different sexualities be interviewed, and that they not all just be white. You know what I mean? I'm on a few boards my damn self, and I feel like white people have a lot of power and voice to say this is wrong. I'm not standing by this. If you're in a position as a business owner, hire Black people with disabilities. And it's not just all about capitalism, But I think not waiting to become disabled to participate in the movement, or not waiting for someone close to you to become disabled to participate. Coming in not having a charity lens. Even something as simple as resharing content, even participating. I mean, I don't want people to feel like they should have to reinvent the wheel, but there's nothing stopping you from creating your own association or organization, and something you work on every month that brings a collective of diverse people together to demand better from these disability nonprofits. Do letter writing campaigns, do public petitions, to demand that there be more diversity in these positions of power, and to stop centering whiteness and white male leaders as the forefront of the movement, and please address capitalism within disability leadership, because there are a number of people who are experienced because they're rich. Your resume is long because you were able to buy a great education, also buy your way into certain networks and for certain
Exactly.
considerations, and even on top of that, some of them are deeply unqualified, even on paper. So I say hire more, demand more board representation, make the CEOs more diverse, and stop feeling like Black leadership would be the end all be all, or that you can't feel comfortable taking. This is a problem within the Black Panthers. There were issues, with gender equity, and men in the Black Panthers not feeling comfortable taking orders, quote unquote, orders from Black women, and they were the majority of the party. And that is a problem in disability nonprofits and organizations. I'm not going to take I'm not going to take orders from a Black person, let alone a Black woman, let alone a Black woman with a disability. So I say engage your community in any way possible. I have some educators follow me, which is kind of surprising. I'm like, my content is kind of,
You're
and so
amazing. Do you realize that? Like, I'm just like reading your content and I'm just like, God, she went there, man. She went there. Just
thank
like
you.
you're
But
saying, I'm sorry about like the white disabled leaders. We're tired of y'all. I'm gonna be perfectly honest. You're soaking up all the oxygen up in here and we don't like it. Like, it's bullshit is what it is. But even more so, it's just, that seems very privileged of me to say, but I feel that, like Black or white disabled men just, okay. Sorry, but like,
no need no need to apologize. I
they
mean,
just,
this is
they
some
think they're the authority on everything. And I'm like, you didn't even, like, you're not, you didn't even, it's not, because sometimes in the disabled community, we call it trauma Olympics, right? Like, oh, and we shouldn't be creating hierarchies where there doesn't need to be hierarchies. But I think one of the hardest things about being a disabled person who was born with a disability, like you were born with a disability, is we're
I
never
wasn't.
allowed to
I
talk about the
acquired it.
differences in experience. We're never allowed to, and everybody's disability is valid. And if you have an invisible disability, you are incredibly valid. But there are differences in experience. There
Yes,
are
ma'am.
just, and it's not like trying to create division or create hierarchies or try to make, I think a lot of times in the disabled community, we're like, oh, that person's trying to create division where there doesn't need to be one. I'm like, no, that disabled person is bringing up a very real issue like racism, like class inequality, like, poverty. I mean, it's very strange sometimes in our community that we don't acknowledge, um, some of these issues. But I think the reason why we don't is because it leads to a lot of infighting. But I wish we'd be less afraid to. You're not afraid.
Well, I will say this. I did acquire my disability, so I spent a good 9 years of my childhood without it. And I will say that there is people really people really don't want to admit this. It's such a different experience, and it alters your views on life. And on top of that, there is a lot of, we are like, I know wheelchair users, it sounds bad, but we are overrepresented as the face of disability. And not that that's a bad thing. I'm sorry, not that that's our fault, but there needs to be more diversity in the imagery of what disability looks like. And when it comes to whiteness and disability for white males, we have to kind of look at the motivations for why people want equality. And a part of that is a desire to tap into the fullness of white male privilege that they can't reach because of their disabilities. So, for example, look at the disabled elected officials that we've had. Greg Abbott, monster. Madison Cons Madison
Terrible
Cawthorn,
human being. I
monster,
hate him.
monster. I mean, Greg Abbott goes to great lengths to hide that he's a wheelchair user, and his policies are harmful to the community. And I don't think both of these men identify as disabled, and that and I will say both of them acquire their disability. And the people who acquire disabilities tend to, I I don't know, they do tend to be propped up because it shows anything can happen to you. But it also, there's a level of, I mean, I know people born with disabilities may have self-hatred, but there's a different level of self-hatred when you've experienced being able-bodied and having able-bodied privilege. And
Right.
that's what needs to be analyzed in public policy and who represents the community, because we need better representation. And people who do not hate being disabled run from the title. I mean, as someone who did this my damn self, I'm speaking
We
from
all did. It's
experience.
okay.
There is no one in this earth that is not problematic. I've had many problematic moments, but and publicly too. I get dragged all the time on Twitter, but it's what you learn from the experiences, and that saying, hey, I was wrong, isn't a bad thing. It doesn't invalidate all the work that you've done. It's actually a step forward, saying, hey, I can learn more. Thank you. This was helpful. Every call out, every drag shouldn't be a dagger to the ego. It can be an educational opportunity. And I had to sit and learn what my privilege was as a person who acquired a disability.
Well, and exactly, and this person is saying disability identity is a real issue, and so we all kind of go through that internalized ableism, whether you have acquired a disability or you've been born with a disability. I didn't identify with being disabled. You couldn't have said disabled to me, until I was 27 years old. And then I was like, okay, I really need to learn to accept myself because this is my life. And I'd always kind of felt, the conversation about shame and we should be ashamed of who we are. For disabled people who were born with disabilities, I'm like, so I just need to be ashamed of I am, because like I grew up in an abusive family, and my dad would call me a worthless cripple and things. And so like that's so ingrained to want to hate myself. But I did notice a change. I don't know about you, but when I really started embracing my disability with my organization claiming disability, there's been a change in people, in my friendships, in just how people deal with me. I get a lot of hate comments. People are very mean out here. Uh, so it's like as soon as you embrace your identity and say, "Hey, I'm proud to be disabled. Like I'm proud to be part of this community." There's an anger that comes out of nowhere of like, why would you ever be proud? you know? So I just feel like disabled people are constantly combating that. Um, and just, you know, it's a tough road. If you're a disabled person out here and you're creating content, it is tough if you embrace your disabled identity because they want us to embrace that overcoming narrative, right? We can overcome our disability. We don't need services. We don't need
We just
health care. We don't
need to
need
try
this. We don't
harder.
need that. They the overcoming narrative is always going to be up here, like where we put it, but that's not the reality. The reality is we can't overcome disability. We can't. It's a natural part of life. Um, and sometimes people are like, oh, you know, why are we still saying like disabled isn't a bad word, like talking about things like that? Because it's still stigmatized.
Mm-hmm.
It's to this day. I mean, it's just, unfortunately, we do sound like a broken record a lot of the time. But yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting that you've had the best of. I do think that's interesting that you say there's too much wheelchair um, representation in the disabled community because I'm inclined to agree. I mean, I do have to use a wheelchair now because my health has gotten so bad, but um, like I've always used a walker, and I'm like, I don't feel represented by wheelchair users. No offense, like, you
I'm
know,
not
like,
offended.
you
I'm not
know,
offended
that's
at all.
yeah. I mean, it's just yeah. I do think that needs to be a conversation, but disability is so again like there's yeah, it's so common and with making mistakes. So a few weeks ago, I posted an article from the Washington Post about how hearing aids can be life changing if you wear your hearing aids. Um, and the title of the article was Wear Your Hearing Aids. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, wear your hearing aids, you know, because it increases your lifespan. And the deaf community came into my comments and they were like, you should not be yelling at people to wear their hearing aids because that's a trigger for a lot of people in the deaf community who were told to wear their hearing aids. And so their parents didn't have to learn sign language. So their parents didn't have to try to communicate with them. So I didn't even realize that I was perpetuating ableism by telling people to wear their hearing aids. Disability is not a monolith, guys. I say it all the time. I do not represent the entirety of the disabled community, and nobody does. I'm just one disabled person out here with a lot of opinions, but we do not speak for the entirety of a community. And no disabled person does. I think sometimes we get super fixated on, you know, Judy Human, may she rest in peace, but she's not the only advocate that was part of the disability rights movement, but she tends to be the one that we become hyper fixated on, you know?
Yeah, I understand. I love Judy. Judy was like she had this way about her, and I really I really regret not getting as close with her as I wanted because she would text me asking me if I was okay, but I'm like, this is a legend texting me. Like, do I like really occupy her time and waste her time with my little problems? um and she's very missed, and I do hope what she's done in terms of making this disability history more well known will translate into making other leaders in the movement more well known too. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah,
the Ed Roberts, the Donald Galloways. There are so many there's such a diversity of Black people who were involved in the disability rights movement, and unfortunately they are very much erased. I started a petition for years ago for the Smithsonian. Everybody loves the Smithsonian National Museum on African American culture and history. Like, people come from, like, it took years to get that, to get Congress to fund it. Like, it took a white supremacist congressman finally dying for the funding to happen, for the concrete to be laid. And I love, love, love the museum. And the food is amazing. Aside from that, the sweet potato pie is great. But aside from that, I was wondering where the disability imagery was. And so I got ton of signatures, and I sent an email to the Smithsonian Museum about, hey, can we have a disability Black history exhibit that highlights disability? And they gave me a long, convoluted letter about it, basically rejecting the idea, and it hurt me. And it hurt me in the sense of, this is another example of erasure, because I can be Black and proud, and Black pride can be highlighted in this museum, but specifically focusing on the disability element of how race and disability intersect, and how being Black, when it comes to what was known as race science, so much a part of Blackness was associated with being disabled, and with the thought that we were intellectually inferior, that having an exhibit that highlights how wrong they got it, and how much of that is still perpetuated in American public policy today and throughout history, should be illuminated by the museum. But it's just, there's no I don't there's not that many homes for disability pride, and it hurts.
Do you think that, because I like to talk to a lot of disabled people in the community, and anytime I'm talking to, Black disabled people, people who identify as disabled, because there is a difference if you don't actively identify, but it seems to be there's like this strongness of, like, we don't talk about disability, we don't talk about illness, we don't talk about chronic illness. It's so ingrained, where it feels like it's so ingrained in the community. What do you think, we can do to help more Black disabled people find their disability pride?
Someone wrote in the comments, sounds like an awesome documentary, and I think that's the perfect idea for it. I think we should have a documentary.
Yeah.
I think there should be more of a, I mean, a year ago, we were celebrating the 50th anniversary of hip hop. I can't believe it's been 50 years. And I decided to put together a 20-minute long video of all the hip hop legends that I knew had disabilities, that were famous, like LL Cool J, he had a disability, DMX, the list was Scarface, the list goes on, even Left Eye from TLC, trying to remember some, I mean, even ODB from the Wu-Tang Clan, even, Questlove of the Roots has autism. Will Smith has dyslexia. All these great, like, these hip hop like stars, and some of them talked about their disabilities in their music. And it was about Blackness and how medical racism creates disabilities, how poverty creates disabilities. Even lead poisoning, like in like concentrated majority Black urban neighborhoods, leads to disability. And my ultimate dream will be to turn that into a documentary, and I've said that before publicly. I'm a child of Africans. My parents are Nigerian. And so the way me and my dad bonded when I was younger, we love history, me and my dad. I love my old man. But the way we spent time together was during Black History Month. We would watch PBS during the week to, learn about Black history. And it was really educational to seeing, you know, strength and forms of oppression. And I think I saw a PBS documentary on Black deaf culture, which is crucial and it's important. And there are subsects of the disabled community that have their own culture, and that's to be respected. But I'd love to have an umbrella documentary that can be shown in schools, that can be, shown on the big screen, that shows that disability is nothing to be ashamed of. But could we ever get that? Could we ever get these artists or these famous people to even agree to appear in a documentary that said disability, given how much shame is associated in the culture of secrecy when it comes to disability? And I think just more educational tools need to be created, and that's going to be on me and on a bunch of other Black disabled activists to create that, you know.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. I hope
Thank you.
that, people like Missy Elliott, you embrace their disability. I mean, I don't know about Samuel L. Jackson, but I do know that he's, talked about having a stutter, and that's where his famous line comes in. I won't say it here, but I think we need more Hollywood representation of disabilities, but I will say, due to recent events, we need, we need people who understand certain intersectionalities. Like, I just, again, like we're having an issue if the only disabled people represented in Hollywood are white disabled people of a certain privilege, because then that's where the racism comes in. And I really hope that that can happen, and I know you will make it happen, because you're out here doing it all, and I see you all the time. I'm just like, she's out here doing the thing. And I really respect it, because I think a lot of times, like you said earlier, disabled people get very tired. Like, we're tired, of it, of having these conversations, and, just to see your fire of like, I'm going to bring Black disabled history to life. Like, that excites me. That makes me excited,
Thank you. It excites me too. In terms of Hollywood, one problem that hasn't been addressed, that's come to light recently with the Tyler Perry movie and Tyler Perry's popularity. Um, it's so wild, because I used to love his films when I was a teenager. And then I started connecting the dots with how he portrays disability in all of his films. And it's always a consequence of sin, um, and using stereotypes. Like for his first film, well, let me not get into the many films, but I think one thing we don't discuss enough, I know Hollywood is known as a producer of filth, provocative content, but a lot of it is still very much controlled by Christian executives. I mean, think back to your childhood and every sitcom where there was a young girl and there was always an episode about her losing her virginity
Oh
and her having to
my
keep it.
God, yes. So
And it was such
inappropriate.
yeah, and just such an importance placed on that child to remain untouched. And how it's 2024 and very seldom do you see divorced families on TV sitcoms, or even having stay-at-home moms still be the dominant, like the dominant narrative. People, I'm not a fan of Roseanne, but people credited Roseanne for being like the first working mom on television in the late 80s. But look at the way that goes. And when that's done in Black Hollywood, it's highlighted by people like Tyler Perry, who have he has so many shows right now on different networks like BET networks and on Netflix, and they all have that Christian ableism. You know, my family is Christian. I respect everybody's religion, but we have got to start tackling how, you know, religion influences content and how ableism influences content too.
Pray the disability away. I personally think, I mean, again, I do not speak for the entirety of the disabled community. I only speak for myself, but I grew up in a highly religious background. And for me, it was toxic because I was always being touched without my consent. I was always being put in the church bulletin board. I was always, I was an object to be pitied. And I just wish that we would, because I do think disabled people do want to be part of church communities, but I think churches are very inaccessible. They really are, in a lot of different ways. And then just the pity aspect. I mean, I literally, had a woman come up to me when I was in the bathroom and she was like, God instructed me to give you this money today. And I was like, I know, like the shit that happens to us, right? Like, I'm in the bathroom, Ola. Like, I'm coming out of the stall. Like,
No, no boundaries.
and I'm just like, and I told her, I'm like, I have a job, I'm a disabled business owner, I make money. Um, and she just like wouldn't take it back. And I'm like, I'm not going to be your charity points today. I'm not going to be the person that you put in your church bulletin that it's like, oh, I helped a destitute disabled person in a bathroom. So we have a lot of education that we need to do around the etiquette of disability and just not talking about it in this tragedy narrative, because statistically in your lifetime you will experience disability. So why are we talking about it in, the ways that we talk about Wendy Williams, the ways that we talk about Michael Oren from The Blind Side,
Oh, oh my God.
conservatorship, guardianship of disabled people. Like, this happens to disabled people every day. Like, disabled people, there are so many people where I live in Iowa that are in guardianships against their will. Like, they are wards of the state. And again, but when it happens to Britney Spears, we're all concerned about it,
Right.
But when it happens to a disabled person that nobody knows, and it's just, and again, the conversation around Wendy Williams, oh, that's so tragic. That woman, she built an empire and now it's just being taken away due to conservatorship, but it happens all the time. I'm not saying that certain people aren't problematic and it's frightening. Yeah, it's real life for disabled people. Um, this is not
That,
just
that,
people like Britney Spears. This is not just famous football players, which if you know the story of Michael from The Blind Side, that movie made so much money and he did not receive any of that money and the family didn't even adopt him. So it was kind of this like white saviorhood story of like a family adopting a black um, child with learning disabilities and then him being drafted into the NFL, but that's wrong. We
and he
should be
didn't even
like, that's wrong.
and
That's
he didn't even have any disabilities. Like, that's the thing. It was so much easier for him to, and he attests to it, his academic performance was great after he got settled. And so it was easy to create the narrative of this big, I don't want to use ableist slurs, but I'm quoting people, this big, dumb, fat black guy who needs the help of a white family because he's not smart. And I mean, and this was a common theme, you know. This, oof, I could go in. But I never wanted to see The Blind Side, and I never understood how. I don't know why Sandra Bullock didn't get more flack for that. I knew the family was racist before this conservatorship was brought up,
Really?
because I
Oh my God. I didn't know that. See, like this is shit we need to know, people. Like,
the the family is just, let me just go back. I remember seeing a post years ago of these two young black kids who the family, the woman who was played by Sandra Bullock, she was praising herself for a KFC that she owned, and seeing a bunch of two black kids sitting by themselves and talking, and she goes up to them and say, "What's up, guys?" You know, she said all the white people in the KFC, in the restaurant that she owned, didn't seem comfortable, but she, the white savior, came up comfortable and gave them money for a football game and all this jazz. And they were just there to charge their cell phone. And so these two black kids outed them and said, "I have a job. I didn't need the money. I don't know what she's talking about, giving us bus fare, that she gave us bus fare to go to the football game, when the football game was literally 2-3 blocks up the street from the KFC." So she literally used them for a photo op to praise herself. And I knew that was complete racism. And I'd spoken about it before the conservatorship came to light on Twitter. Sandra Bullock, I don't want to get into it, but she is the adopted mother of two black children. Whether you knew the story was false or not, there's no reason for any mother to participate. I'm sorry, any person to know what privilege they have and participate in a white savior film. It's wrong. And on top of that, when she was adopting her son Louis, who's black, she was married to a Nazi, and they had been living together. And they had been living together when the baby came in. So not only, and I've seen her content, she's responsible for helping put George Lopez on the map, who's known to be anti-black, who has had, I mean, in his comedy routines, he's like, the worst thing you can do in a Mexican household is bring home a black person. And so she helped him. Her production company was behind the George Lopez show, and she dressed up as a chola on one of George Lopez's comedy shows on, I think, TBS. She, her history when it comes to race, Sandra Bullock, is something I have discussed on Twitter publicly, written the whole thread, and shared it on my IG. She has a very sketchy history when it comes to racism, and I think as the mother of two black children, she should have known better.
I and again, I'm like learning all these new things that I didn't know, and I'm so thankful. You know, I
Yeah.
just feel like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you,
Oh, you're good. You're good.
but guys, we can't be afraid. Like, I'm always afraid of saying something wrong because I always say wrong things. I always, like, I'm just myself. I'm not like, you know, but I think we need to not be afraid to have these I think there's so much fear around having conversations like this, like, you know, I don't want to be perceived as racist or whatever, but I kind of feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like racism is similar to ableism. We are all inherently racist, and we need to be actively unlearning, you know, just in the same regard as ableism. We need to be actively unlearning these things and these, you know, I don't think anyone's trying to hurt anyone by having conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but I caution people in comparing, you know, racism and ableism. Um, I think it's a very, very tough line to toe. Um, and so I encourage people, you know, the experiences are very unique. Um, like for example, we do need to do some unlearning. All of us do. And ableism is deeply ingrained in our society. So we're constantly doing and saying things that are oppressive. And racism, it's ingrained in our society too. The slight difference, not the slight, but the major difference is when, how do I say this? The major difference is that when I get out of my wheelchair, I'm still Black. And I'm separate from my mobility device. And on top of that, there's a way in which many of us can live in the shadows of disability and never be identified as such. And it's not always the same. Like we don't have like the ability for Black people to pass as other races is not to the same effect as passing privilege for disabled people. So I do want to, make sure there is a complete distinction. Racism and ableism are interconnected because ableism stems from white supremacy, specifically what white men think is superior. Straight, white, European descendants, the superior race, no disabilities. So they all stem from white supremacy, but they're still very different.
You're so amazing. And I'm sorry for saying the
Don't
wrong thing. And
No need to apologize. We like everyone is here learning, honestly. Um, I appreciate when people are vulnerable and share, hey, I don't know something, help me, so don't apologize. It's okay.
oh, because the reality is, I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be Black and disabled, and nobody should be trying to pretend like we do understand all these super complex issues. I was talking in another interview about how there's such a fear of disabled people being wrong. And I feel like disabled people are wrong all the time. Like, that was a take that I didn't particularly appreciate. I mean, there's shit that disabled people say all the time that I'm like, that was not it. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't think we're really understanding, like, we're a huge, diverse community of people, with different backgrounds and different experiences. Like, we're not supposed to know everything there is to know, but I just appreciate you giving me space because unfortunately, in this age of the internet, exactly teachable moments, we're not given a lot of teachable moments anymore. I'm not excusing behaviors of people, but I do think people are afraid of making mistakes. And I think it's just okay to be like, I don't know. I don't know. And again, like, my advocacy represents my disabled experience, no one else's. I don't claim to speak for the entirety of a community, and nobody ever should. And I think the more diverse experiences we can have, and I think so. I really like Leroy Moore from Crip Hop Nation because he's always just like saying things that are just like amazing. Like, I think we need to, personally, I think in the disabled community, we need more space for criticism. I
And that's why I
really do
criticized
think that.
Leroy. And that's why I criticized Leroy. No, yes, I'll be frank about it. I differ with a lot of, like, just like we deal with misogyny in this disabled community, we deal with misogyny in the Black disabled community, and I've criticized Leroy's takes often. Um, so you know,
Oh,
you
really?
know, yes, and it's
Exactly. You're teaching me things I did not know. I did not
let me
know.
just let me just say this respectfully. You have a right to learn from who you want to learn from. You know, I just add my experiences, my personal experiences to it, and dealing with the misogyny of a few. I mean, like I'll just say, we take it out of the context of disability. I'm constantly fighting. We call it misogynoir. It's an experience of gender-based discrimination that applies specifically to Black women. And in the larger Black community, the way Black women are subjugated and silenced, and we have a crisis of Black femicide. You know, the number one killer of Black women, Black pregnant women, is homicide. And the dominant conversation has always been, you know, ignoring our issues as Black women. So of course these issues are going to enter the space of the disabled community. So, you know, learn from who you want to learn from. You know, my disagreements, and my disagreements with the scholarly work of certain advocates who are academics are public. I publicly engaged with these people. So, you know, learn from who you feel is best.
I love you so much. I just feel like that demonstrates just so much because I mean, again, like I think it's funny, like when I'm talking to an able-bodied person and I'll be like, able-bodied, non-disabled, whatever language we want to use here, folks. Like we get kind of hung up on the language piece, and I want us to be respectful of disability history and the terminology, able-bodied, non-disabled, whatever you want to say. Like I think it's kind of funny when I'm like, I'll be talking to an able-bodied person and they'll be like, you know, I thought all disabled people agreed or whatever, or we all got along, and it's really not that way. The disabled community can be
I'm
toxic as
sorry.
fuck.
It's
Straight
true.
up. Like,
It's true. We
I
did
mean,
not all
it
agree.
is. And I had posts like, I see y'all fucking stealing my shit, and I'm just like, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I'm tired of that shit in the community. I'm sick of that shit because we're supposed to be helping each other, and the people out here with bigger resources and bigger, you know, I don't have a staff. Ola and I, we're just people out here with our own opinions, our own ideals. Like, we're not these huge. I have a whole, you and I will have to get into that later. But I mean, the whole thing about like the disability nonprofit and like the structure and like the model and
Oh my God. And the low pay. Like you should want to pay disabled people what they're worth if you are a disability led nonprofit. And the layoffs. And it's really I can't believe it. I've seen many of my friends suffer as a result and be exploited for their labor. And it's wrong. Like we can't even get ahead in organizations about us and about our plight.
we're all like scrounging for resources. I don't even think that it's like the disabled community is like pitted against each other per se, but it's kind of like when I worked in the nonprofit sector. We were all scrambling for the same resources, the same funding, the same opportunities, blah, blah, blah. Like, so it creates a lot of hostility. It creates a lot of resentment. Um, yeah, I think there's a lot of bullshit in the disabled community that we do not call people on the carpet on. And that's why I love people like Ola, and I always will, because
Oh, thank
she's
you.
just always gonna say it like it is. Like I'm like, what is our concern here if we don't just say things like they are? And people criticize me all the time. People got very mad at me when I interviewed Emmy-winning director Paris Barkley with the Monster Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer series. disabled people were very, very upset with me about highlighting those Black disabled actors
Oh,
who were in that
wow.
series. Rodney Buford, Michael Spady. Um, Rodney Buford was from Deaf University. I don't know if you ever saw that, but he was one of the victims of Jeffrey Dahmer in the Jeffrey Dahmer series. And I wrote an article about why aren't we talking about the Black disabled actors in the Jeffrey Dahmer series. And, I actually got in touch with everybody. But again, like that is people are like, we don't want disability portrayed in that way. But like you talk about in your series, like 50% of all Black disabled people are experience brutality from the police and experience all these things. It's like we can't always be sharing the happy stories of disability. You know what I mean? But I also
Respectability.
understand, huh?
Respectability politics. That's what is called respectability politics. That we can only display a respectable image of what disability is.
Really, that's what it's called.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it applies to a lot of things. But yeah, any community that feels like they have to present a perfect image to be respected and to gain rights, um, respectability politics. Like we need to show all of what disability looks like.
Exactly. And I think the thing that bothers me the most is like we have people like Julian Mercado, we have people like Lolo Spencer who are on TV, are Black and disabled, portraying disability in a light, and why aren't we supporting more Black disabled people doing the work? You know what I mean? Like I'm just like there's always this push in the community, there's not enough representation, there's not enough representation. Well, maybe you just don't want to say that's not the representation that you want to see. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
It,
I'm
mm-hmm.
just like, we need to be supporting people who are out here. Like, it might not be perfect representation, but, you know, I think it's amazing. I think it's important to support our community, but we're so divided in so many ways. And again, like I don't think it's purposeful. I'm too honest for my own good, but like that's why nobody likes me out here, guys. Like
You are
I am not
loved.
liked. I don't care. Like I created a company for me to have my own opinions, my own ideals and things, and if you don't like me, well, that's your right. I totally understand. Like I don't represent all of it. But the thing about it is, even if you don't like a certain disabled person or a certain advocate, there's hundreds more to choose from. Oh, you're so sweet. Like if you don't find an advocate, but I challenge everybody in the community to kind of push themselves with their viewpoints. If a disabled person says something that you don't like the disabled community is entrenched in racism or something like that, like I challenge you to widen your horizons a little bit instead of just going to, well, I'm also oppressed. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like it's not comparative, you know, like I just
You
did
can be
earlier.
you
It's not
can be
the same.
oppressed. You can be oppressed in one identity and an oppressor in another.
Yes, thank you. Exactly. Like,
It's very hard for people to take nuanced approaches to how they view things because society has continued to say the worst thing you can be is black or the some some have said the worst thing you can be is disabled. Like I've heard that joke amongst, like I've even heard it on Family Guy. What would you rather be, crippled or black? And how it was a tough question for, I guess, one of the characters to answer, because people it seemed to equate that, um, which is awful. Um, but I think it's just an indicator of how we look at identity, and how we feel like those are the two least privileged groups. Um, and I'm not here to measure who has it worse. I'm here to talk about how white supremacy oppresses us all. And that includes ableism.
Yes. I have no idea what time it is, but I'm going to check. But this conversation has been so amazing. And again, you always teach me so much because I don't know. Like I seriously don't know. Like I try to read as much as I can. I try to watch videos. I try to do as much as I can. And guys, we don't get cookies for this shit either. You know what I mean? Like it's not, this is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to challenge yourself. You're supposed to like help other marginalized communities and take a hard look at your advocacy and seeing if it's helping people or if it's not, or if it's hurting people. Like, this is what being an advocate is all about. And Ola, I just really appreciate you constantly being a teacher for me, because you're constantly teaching me. One, that I need to have a strong voice that I hope to have like you someday, because we need advocates like you who are brave enough to disrupt the status quo.
Well, you have a strong voice. You have a bunch of followers who adore you. I'm one of them. So keep doing what you're doing and shining for so many disabled people who have yet to find their pride, and you're encouraging them to with your organization and your apparel, which I love.
Guys, please go check out all of Ola's channels and buy her merch and, pay reparations this month. Like, do your part, and not, Black History during Black History Month, of course, but we need to be celebrating Black disabled history every day, not just in February. And I do want to get back into these interviews. I've just been really tired and just really dealing with a lot of health stuff. So I just really appreciate you being here with me today. Thank you.
I wish you well. I wish you wellness and happiness.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to post clips of this interview. Guys, thank you so much for being here. This was an amazing conversation. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Ola.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so